Every small town has its legends, and Garrison was no different. Since she was a little girl, Beverly Hollerback had heard about the spine-tingling legend of Mary Knott. Everyone knew the story. It was as much a part of the town as the paved streets the people walked on. It had happened in the late 1800s. Mary Knott was an innocent 10-year-old girl. She had straight black hair and a plain face, and always wore hand-me-down clothes. The Knotts were a poor family, and all the children of Garrison liked to remind Mary of that fact. She was bullied every day at school. Some kids called her Hairy Mary because of her messy long locks. Some kids pulled her hair or knocked her down or tripped her as she walked. She was treated with cruelty every day. She didn't do anything to deserve this treatment, other than being born poor. Next to the old school was a small lake that people called the watering hole. Mary liked to sit by the water and read her books. Books were her only escape from an otherwise painful existence. One day, a group of kids went to the watering hole looking to harass Mary. They knocked down her books and ripped her already tattered dress. She stood up in anger, sick of the bullying. She was ready to fight back, to stand up to the cowards that made her life hell. When one particularly large boy, Andrew Harris, charged and knocked her into the water. His intention was to just get her drenched. He didn't know she couldn't swim. The kids thought her struggles were a fit of anger, and they laughed and laughed and laughed. She slapped her arms and clawed to get to the surface, but she couldn't do it. That cruel laughter surrounded her. But when she stopped moving and didn't emerge from the water, the laughter stopped. Mary Knott had drowned, and the last thing she heard on this earth was the sound of children's laughter. It is said that a pain like that can never go away, but instead stays etched in the place it occurred. It's said that to this day, she haunts the watering hole by the abandoned schoolhouse. Multiple drownings had occurred in that small lake over the years, and the superstitious people of Garrison fully believed they were caused by Mary, forever encased by rage and death. No one with any sense went near the watering hole. Some even called it the watering hell. There was even a song that the children sang about Mary Knott as they jumped rope. Near the old school, there's a lake. To swim there would be a mistake. Mary Knott rests in the water deep. Beware the person who disturbs her sleep, for if she hears you splash around, she'll hold you tight and make you drown. And as you die filled with fear, children's laughter will be the last thing that you hear. Beverly wasn't sure if she truly believed the story, but the 12-year-old wasn't about to go near that place. She had always been shy and a goody two-shoes. She had red hair almost always in braids and freckles that kissed her face all over. She had friends who always dared her to test her limits. But Beverly liked to play it safe. And going near the watering hell was not playing it safe. Only the bravest or possibly stupidest of teens would dip their toes into the water as a dare. Even the adults warned the children about venturing there, stating to leave the dead alone. So Beverly stayed away from that evil place. She had just said goodbye to her 3 best friends as she made the turn down Clarkson Street. Another productive, safe day at school. Her home was only a 15-minute walk from school. She continued down the old suburban street. All of a sudden, she heard a scuffle. She instinctively stopped and turned to her right to see 2 men in their 20s engaged in a fistfight in an opened garage. At their feet lay baggies filled with some sort of white powder. "You liar, you cheated me," the first man yelled, face red with rage. "I did not, the stuff's all there," the other yelled back. Fists were flying and insults were being thrown. The two young men were so enthralled in their rage that they forgot that the garage door was open. Beverly decided to scurry away, but the movement caused the bigger of the two guys to notice Beverly watching them in shock. Stop it, some kid is watching," the man said. He was scary looking. He had a shaved head and a tattoo of a snake coiled around his arm. His blue eyes were slightly glazed over. The shorter of the two men looked over and cursed. He had brown hair and a big scar on his eyebrow. His eyes were clear but very cold. The two looked at each other for a moment and seemed to have a silent conversation between each other, before the big man let out a sigh. Beverly was completely caught off guard as he bum rushed her and punched her square in the temple. Everything turned black. When Beverly woke up, the sun was already beginning to set. Her head was pounding. It brought tears to her eyes, which somehow made the pain even worse. She couldn't move her arms or legs, she realized with a panic. Her legs were tied with something. Whatever it was, the same material seemed to be keeping her arms pinned behind her back. She could feel herself lying on the floor of something, but it kept vibrating. Her senses were slowly coming back to her. First was her feeling, hence the pain, and then was her hearing. "Relax, man, no one comes out here." She could hear a male voice saying, "I have been using the old school for storage for the past couple of months. Everyone's so scared of that stupid ghost that not even the police come down here." "Hey, you didn't grow up here," another male voice said. "That story is real. Don't be disrespectful." Beverly's sight was swimming back into focus. She realized she was on the floor of a van. The rumbling of the engine was lightly bouncing her body. Looking at her feet, she could see zip ties connecting her ankles together. She assumed that was also what was keeping her hands together. Fear hit her like ice water as she realized the situation she was in. What were these guys going to do to her? "Disrespectful," the first voice mocked. "Hey Mary," he screamed. "Mary, come get me. I'm here where you died," he mockingly sang. He laughed at his own hubris as if he had made a great joke. "Hey, watch it," the other guy said as his companion continued to laugh. "Look, are we going to do this or what?" He continued with nervousness in his voice. Whether that nervousness was because of Mary Knott, or what they were going to do, Beverly did not know. Yeah, guess we should," conceded the other man as he shut the engine of the van off. Immediately, the vibrating feeling stopped, and the two men opened their doors. She could hear footsteps as one of the men walked to the back of the van and opened the door with a quick jerk. He grabbed her by the ankles and pulled her towards him. She slid on the dirty bed of the van before being fully encased in his arms. He not so gently threw her over his shoulder, like she was a bag of potatoes, making her grunt. "She's starting to wake up," the man holding her said. "Then let's not prolong her suffering," the man with the scar on his face said disingenuously, sarcasm and sadistic humor rich in his voice. Where the other man seemed resigned to harming Beverly, this man seemed to find it funny. Beverly looked around. Her suspicions of where she was were verified. She could see the lake from her upside-down view. She knew where they were, the watering hole. She tried to beg for mercy, to plead for her life, but a lump in her throat prevented it, and all she could do was cry. They were walking closer and closer to the lake. "Sorry, kid," the man holding her said. "You were at the wrong place at the wrong time." With only those few words said, he tossed her into the icy water. He had already begun to turn around before she was fully submerged. It was freezing. She panicked as she realized that the bond stopped her from being able to swim. She was slowly sinking into the darkness of the lake and running out of air. This was it. This was how she was going to die. She was only 12. Thoughts of her parents rushed through her mind, and she felt her heart ache even worse than her lungs. Movement to her left caught her attention. At first, all she saw was a faint glowing which slowly turned into a small figure. It was a girl. It was a girl. A girl was swimming towards her. She looked ethereal with black hair forming a halo, and glowing skin giving Beverly a light to see. Her eyes were warm and comforting, and she smiled gently as she took Beverly into her arms. Mary not? This wasn't how Beverly had pictured her at all. Mary slowly took her into her arms, but instead of dragging her down, she swiftly swam Beverly up to the surface. They were getting closer and closer. She could see the light of the moon through the water. Beverly gasped as she finally broke through the water. She looked for Mary, but she was gone. And yet, she could still feel small hands gently lifting her and laying her on the ground by the lake. Her gasp had caught the attention of her assailants, who were already walking back to their van. "What the hell?" the smaller of the two men said, confused. They saw Beverly on the ground. They both began walking towards her when they saw movement coming from the water. Rising from the lake came the frightening silhouette of Mary Knott. She looked nothing like she had underwater. Her black, dirty hair covered all of her face, except for one bloodshot eye and the corner of a blue mouth. What could be seen of her skin was blotchy with black marks of rot. Her kind demeanor was changed to one of horrifying rage. She looked at the two men and bent her neck to the side in an awkward, jerky movement. Beverly heard the sound of choking as water began spewing out of both of the men's mouths. They began choking as water continued to pour out of their mouths. The more they tried to cough the water out, the more seemed to take its place. Their eyes bulged and their hands scratched at their necks and faces, as if trying to pry something off. They were falling to the ground, their faces turning blue. Reality was hitting Beverly like a freight train. The shock of the scene and the night's events were enough to lull Beverly into unconsciousness. Before the blackness overtook her world, she could have sworn she heard something. Children. Yes. She swore she could hear the sounds of children laughing. When Beverly woke up hours later, the two men lay dead on the ground. There was no sign of her angel of mercy, or the men's angel of death. She found a sharp rock on the ground she awkwardly used to slowly cut the ties at her wrists, before more quickly cutting away at the ones at her ankles. On unsteady knees and soaking wet, Beverly stood up and slowly made her way home. She paused for a moment and turned around, looking at the lake. "Thanks, Mary," she whispered to the air. The air was still, and the only sound that met her ears was the chirping of crickets. She turned back around and continued on. She didn't see the small head poke up from the water and smile.